To everyone joining us today. My name is Meredith Petillo, and I will be providing the regulatory update portion of today's summit agenda. I am the Senior Director for Technical and Regulatory Affairs at the Independent Beauty Association, or IBA. IBA is a U.S. nonprofit trade association for the independent and entrepreneurial sector of the cosmetics and personal care product industry. IBA membership is made up of about 600 primarily small to medium-sized businesses ranging from brands to manufacturers, suppliers, service providers, all the areas that support this industry. IBA is focused on four main pillars, the first of which is education, including technical and regulatory affairs, as well as supply chain and sustainability. Second is member services, then reasonable legislation, especially as it applies to small business, and networking. I want to thank Jen and Michelle for putting this event together and providing a wonderfully curated selection of topics, all about the very important product category of sunscreens. It's a challenging category for many reasons that are going to be discussed all throughout today, but it's also fun. We're also used to seeing imagery like this related to sunscreens. Beautiful, sunny, a delightful boost of vitamin D just by looking at the picture. I love sunscreens both professionally and as a consumer. And I'm sure this audience shares that opinion, at least at some level. Sunscreens are one of the categories of personal care products that reaches a wide range of consumers. Almost everyone is a sunscreen consumer to some extent, and therefore the impacts of the regulatory landscape for sunscreen products will reach most, if not all, consumers. So delving into today's topic, a regulatory update. Certainly not as sunny as the last image, to be sure. Looking out at the horizon right now when it comes to regulatory affairs for sunscreens can be daunting, stirring up questions and what ifs and the not so sunny outlook of what the category will look like when all of our questions are able to be answered. There's a lot of activity to cover, and I hope to highlight some key items to note now, as well as some others that need to be monitored, because I think we can all agree that the future of sunscreen regulation that is looming out there holds game-changing power. The regulatory complexity has never been greater, with the combination of the regulatory status of active ingredients, impacts on health and human safety, both from an ingredient perspective and a sun protection and skin cancer prevention perspective, as well as environmental concerns. All of these pieces coming together make the regulatory landscape more challenging to navigate than ever. And while not strictly sunscreen regulation, sustainability legislation and packaging requirements cannot be ignored. We all know that these pieces overlap and intertwine, adding to those ominous dark skies of uncertainty. So let's dig in and focus on a few key markets with some things that are pending that have the potential to really change the game for brands looking to sell sunscreen products, especially internationally. We're going to talk about what is going on in the US at the FDA federal level and at the state level, in particular, the efforts to regulate the allowed UV filters due to environmental concerns. This is a key driving force behind much of the state activity that we're seeing, environmental concerns over the potential impact to coral reefs. And I believe later today you will hear from the Personal Care Product Council speaking on the coral reef research update session. So please be sure to tune in for that important update to help gain a deeper understanding of this topic and this subset of sunscreen regulation. We'll make a quick note of Canada and then highlight some ingredient-centric updates from the EU and UK. We know that the EU is a very important regulatory market because so many other countries and jurisdictions look to the EU cosmetic regs as inspiration for their regulatory schemes. So the implications of changes in the EU are far-reaching. All right, so starting things off with a look at what's going on in the US with respect to FDA regulation. Who would have guessed that the pandemic would move the needle for US OTC monograph reform, but the March 2020 CARES Act did just that. Buried deep within the CARES Act is a section on monograph reform, which has now replaced the existing monograph rulemaking process. Monograph reform led to some direct and immediate impacts for sunscreens. We'll get into some details in the next few slides. Very quickly, it's worth mentioning one component, MUFA, the over-the-counter monograph user fee program. This program introduced for the first time facility fees for OTC drug manufacturers. The impact that the new user fee program has had on industry, especially smaller businesses in the OTC space, makes this noteworthy, especially because there are no exemptions or reduced fees for small business. What you see here are the fees, regardless of whether you're a large pharma company or primarily cosmetic manufacturer, also producing a select assortment of OTCs like sunscreens. Facility fees now need to pay user fees annually, and after just 2 fiscal years, we've seen a 19% increase in the annual fees, resulting largely from a substantial decrease in the number of fee-eligible facilities. Makes sense, right? New expensive fees without a small business tier. If you're only making a handful of SKUs of SPF lip balms, it might not be worth it or sustainable to pass the costs on to your customers. The fees are based on how your business is registered in the FDA's system. So one would imagine, since this came into effect, the motivation to ensure the accuracy and correct registration information that might not have been such a big deal previously has really increased, and facilities no longer making OTCs have now likely officially indicated this in the system. In a nutshell, there are fewer OTC facilities from fiscal year 2021 to fiscal year 2022, but the overall fee budget did not change, so fees went up. And I don't want to spend too much time on a MUFA, but it's worth mentioning for any manufacturers in attendance. Very quickly, the last 2 rows in the chart reflect OMOR fees. These steeply priced OTC monograph order request fees you see listed are only applicable in the event that you want to submit an OTC monograph order request to FDA. These are not annual fees. Examples of tier 1 requests would be for the addition of a new ingredient or a new indication. Tier 2 includes requests to reorder existing drug facts label information, adding to the other information section, modifying directions of use, among others. These fees are only paid if a company requests an OMOR meeting. So what else came out of CARES? Another outcome of the CARES Act and the included monograph reform actually provided some certainty to what has been the seemingly endless evolution of sunscreen regulatory action and intentions of FDA. We got the deemed final order. Carrying on our meteorological theme, the deemed final order looks nice, rainbows, clear skies, because it provides certainty and functionally it solidified the status quo. Now, before we get too comfortable with feeling certain, it wouldn't be sunscreens in the US if it were that easy. At the same time, we can enjoy some solid ground. Just kidding, we also are now operating with the prospect of the proposed order. When it comes to going down that path, not so sunny. So the deemed final order. Essentially, this is the scheme under which we are currently operating in the US, and it maintained the status quo for the most part. Most sunscreens are already in compliance because the information in the deemed final order is primarily referencing 2 existing sources, the 1999 STAID final monograph and the 2011 final labeling and effectiveness testing rule. Just a quick note about the link there at the bottom of the slide. This is an FDA webpage with additional information and the direct links to both the deemed final order and the proposed order, which we'll talk about after going over some features of the deemed final order, can be found via that link. Okay, so according to the deemed final order, what actives are allowed? Here they are. There are 16 and they should look familiar and not provide any real surprises. The deemed final order also identifies the allowed combinations, which you can reference in the order itself. Again, no real surprises here, so I didn't list the combinations just for the sake of time. Another important area that has been a bit of a question mark over the past 20-something years or so, especially for a select few, is what dosage forms are allowed. The deemed final order identifies allowed dosage forms, which are listed here: oils, lotions, creams, gels, butters, pastes, ointments, sticks, sprays, and interestingly, powders are also included. So what about SPF? The deemed final order does not set a maximum SPF limit. So under current regulations, there is no upper limit. Broad spectrum testing is not required, but there is optional broad spectrum testing and labeling requirements if a brand wants to make this claim. So those are some of the highlights from the deemed final order, but the story does not end there with the deemed final order. FDA also published a proposed order, which lays out a compliance pathway that will require significantly more changes to formulas, labels, etc., than what industry is dealing with today via the deemed final order. The proposed order will not take effect until it is finalized, and we'll see what things look like when we get there. Not as sunny. Let's talk about actives. Under the proposed order, only titanium dioxide and zinc oxide are considered GRACE, generally regarded as safe and effective. That's it. So if the proposed order were finalized tomorrow, we would have the mineral filters only. Two ingredients were not given GRACE status due to safety concerns: aminobenzoic acid, PABA, and trolamine salicylate. So of the remaining non-GRACE ingredients, FDA determined that they do not have enough data on sinoxate, dioxybenzone, insulazole, homosalate, miratamate, octinoxate, octisalate, octocrylene, patamate O, salicylbenzone, oxybenzone, or avobenzone. Of that list, and in response, industry has asked FDA to defer action on 8 ingredients in order to gather the data to fill the gaps. Industry must actively demonstrate that they are making progress and will receive 1-year deferrals, at which time FDA would then reassess. If FDA determines, however, that at any time there is not progress that is likely to result in a positive GRACE determination, FDA can move forward with the order process. The 8 deferred ingredients that are currently being pursued by industry are avobenzone, insulazole, homosalate, miratamate, octinoxate, octisalate, octocrylene, and oxybenzone. This is an area I'm afraid there is little certainty that can be relayed at this time. Of course, this is a critical and game-changing piece of the puzzle. Shifting from ingredients to SPF claims, the proposed order sets much stricter boundaries, as it is currently written, than the deemed final order. The proposed order allows for label claims up to 60 plus and allows for formulated SPF values up to 80. FDA is proposing that all sunscreens SPF 15 and higher satisfy broad spectrum requirements. Some other changes from the deemed final order to the proposed order come in the area of dosage forms. Here are the proposed allowed dosage forms: oils, lotions, creams, gels, butters, pastes, ointments, and sticks. Let's also note that sprays are listed, but with an additional requirement to minimize potential risks for inhalation and flammability. Labeling requirements can be expected to accompany the spray format. So what didn't make the cut as the proposed order is written today? Powders have been given the status of insufficient data, and FDA has stated that if powders move to GRACE status, they would require particle size restrictions. All other formats would not be in scope for GRACE status under the proposed order when it is finalized, and therefore would require brands interested in making another format to submit an NDA, a new drug application, if they wish to market a dosage form like a wipe, a towelette, a body wash, a shampoo, and so on. So quick note about Canada. Canada is one of the few other countries that regulates sunscreens as drug products. They can be either a DIN or an NHP, a natural health product, based on the ingredients used. Now, there's a page on the Government of Canada's website under the headline of Sun Safety, which references the safety concerns that US FDA has put out over the past few years about sunscreen actives. Just wanted to note the remark that Health Canada has reviewed these findings and agrees with FDA. So let's stay tuned and see what happens next. All right, so state activity. If the fees and the deemed final order versus the proposed order aren't enough to make your head spin, let's talk about states and what they are looking to do. As expected, the main focus of FDA's activity is related to human health and safety, but the states are also looking at environmental concerns. You're going to get a deeper dive later today, so let's just briefly mention the local city ban in Key West, Florida, that then had the rug pulled out from underneath it by the state legislature and governor signing a law prohibiting that type of ban. The reason that Key West was pursuing this ban was to protect their coral reefs. So at the moment, it seems that the back and forth in Florida has settled down, but Hawaii is not as settled. This audience is likely already aware of the 2018 ban of oxybenzone and octinoxate that became effective in Hawaii as of January 1st, 2021. There's been some recent action in Maui County proposing the ban on the sale, distribution, or use of non-mineral sunscreens. Additionally, statewide efforts to ban non-GRACE actives appear to be on pause for the moment, but again, this is a space to definitely keep an eye on. All right, so switching gears from the US, let's talk about the EU for a little bit, where unlike the US and Canada, sunscreens are regulated as cosmetics. And as previously mentioned, what happens in the EU does not stay in the EU, as so many other countries look to the EU cosmetics regulation as a model. So today, let's take a look at a handful of ingredients to be keeping an eye on with respect to EU regulatory activity. And I first want to give credit where credit is due. IBA is incredibly fortunate to have Biorius as a partner for our EU and UK program. And much of the following information is excerpted from a presentation given by Dr. Frederic Lebrun, the CEO of Biorius, from a much larger cosmetic update presentation he provided at the recent IBA Tech Reg Forum earlier this spring. UV filters were obviously covered in the cosmetics update because sunscreens are cosmetics in most of the world. So what UV filters should we be watching? Now, this information on titanium dioxide should not really be a surprise because as of October 1st, 2021, this is the information necessary for determining compliance of titanium dioxide as a UV filter based on particle size. You can see the particle size ranges and associated restrictions here. Some tips that Biorius has shared with the IBA membership when considering these particle size restrictions are to check your assortment's various product types and focus on loose powders, sprays, and aerosols. There's no regulatory impact if the product cannot be inhaled, for example, a sunscreen lotion. If impacted, check with your supplier about the particle size distribution in quantity of titanium dioxide, or you could commission the test yourself. There is no regulatory impact if less than 1% of the titanium dioxide particles has a diameter below 10 micrometers. If impacted, check the properties of the finished product. For sprays and aerosols, you should have proof that the diameter of the emitted droplets is not below 10 micrometers. For loose powders, you should have proof that the diameter of particles in the finished product is not below 10 micrometers. Another set of UV filters getting attention, the review of potential endocrine disruptors has become a hot topic for the European Commission, and oxybenzone, octocrylene, and homosalate are under review. So let's take a look at oxybenzone, or benzophenone 3, not to be confused with just benzophenone. Today, we have a 6% maximum as a UV filter, plus a labeled warning. However, later this year, it is expected that the new restriction listed here will be adopted. 6% maximum for face, hands, and lip products, excluding propellant and pump spray products. 2.2% in body products, including the sprays, and a maximum of 0.5% otherwise. Moving on to octocrylene. Octocrylene currently has a maximum restricted limit of 10% for all products. Again, it is expected that later this year, a 9% maximum will be set for spray products, and a 10% maximum remains for other product types. Additionally, benzophenone as an impurity or degradation product of octocrylene must be kept to a trace level. The expected adoption and implementation dates are listed here. So it could be expected that this is adopted June, July of this year, 2022. And then with a 6-month implementation timeframe for new products, and a 12-month implementation period for products, existing products already on the market. So the fourth ingredient we will discuss is homosalate, currently allowed at a 10% maximum in all product types. However, there has been some recent movement. On April 6th, a draft regulation was released based on SCCS recommendations of 7.34% in face products and pump sprays, and 0.5% max for everything else. Now, originally, the SCCS recommendation was set for 0.5% across the board, but after input from industry, additional information was considered, as well as the role that homosalate plays in the prevention of skin cancer. And the SCCS agreed to the levels listed here. So 7.34% in face products and pump spray products. We may expect to see this finalized by the fourth quarter of this year, and an effective date of Q4 2024 for new products and Q4 2026 for existing products already on the market. And that would be the withdrawal date for non-compliant products still on the market at that point. All right, so the UK. Earlier this spring, the UK Office of Product Safety and Standard called for data to evaluate the safety of benzophenone 3, octocrylene, and homosalate, specifically focusing on endocrine disruption potential. Sound familiar? So it is reasonable to expect a similar outcome to what we are seeing in the EU. They have received the SCCS opinions, so those will be factored into any decision making. So keep an eye out for additional information in this space. So we've gone over a brief update on sunscreen regulatory activity in just some of the key markets, and I'm sure everyone is wishing for the sunny, beachy feelings again from the beginning of the presentation, but no doubt the door is open for perhaps more questions than answers. One of the next logical questions is, of course, so what do we do now? We want to be able to take some action. What are the steps that we should be putting into place? This is something that we hear, pretty frequently from some of our member companies. And unfortunately, there is no one size fits all answer. There isn't one solution that is clearly rising to the top as a clear and obvious path forward. Do we wait and see what happens when the fate of pending matters become truly final? Will they even be truly final anytime soon? I mean, we've heard this before, right? Anybody who's been working with sunscreens for any length of time knows that we're expecting something. We're expecting something. So will this be more final than what we've known in recent history? Do we proactively reformulate? Certainly having new formula options available with stability already underway if and when more pieces of this puzzle become final is appealing, but there is the risk of things changing yet again to consider, and the costs associated with development work that is uncertain can be challenging, especially for smaller companies. One quick note about proactive reformulation efforts is to work very closely with your cross-functional teams, your product development team, chemists, regulatory, legal, etc., when considering boosters. It could be considered quite reasonable that regulators will get savvy to the use of ingredients coined as boosters that may actually be functioning as UV filters. And if they haven't been approved as a UV filter, and there's no other established logical function in the formula otherwise, again, use caution when having those internal risk conversations. Additionally, we talked today a bit about regulatory divergence at the state level in the US. Should companies be considering regional or local SKUs? You know, the mythical global label is always the ideal. So splicing up sunscreens into even more submarkets based on regulatory requirements is not a fun option to consider, and certainly not an ideal proposal, especially if we're talking about smaller quantities. And then if we start to expand the horizon of this regulatory update to also consider some of the other, very significant and very challenging areas and initiatives impacting the industry from a supply chain perspective and a sustainability perspective, selecting the path forward perhaps becomes even less clear for sunscreen products and many other product categories as well. That being said, and while I fear there are still more questions than answers available right now, this is a resilient, creative, and innovative industry. So no doubt there will be an ongoing future for sunscreens. And as we're coming up on time, I would recommend that, as always, now is the time to really collaborate and communicate, work with your trade associations, consult with your regulators, really delve into your supply chain. Develop your relationships with your suppliers. There's so many variables to the outcome of this, regulatory landscape. And of which the regulatory aspect is just one. I mean, albeit it kind of, it's a very important and has a potential for drastic impact. But it is just one angle that comes into play for existing products and for new product development. So with that, thank you so much. Here's my contact information, and I want to thank our organizers once again. We can use whatever time is remaining for questions. Thank you.